In the United States, wearing military uniforms and/or medals you are not entitled to is known collectively as stolen valor. In Britain, such people are commonly called wolts, after the famous fantasist film character Walter Mitty. In Britain, the most common form of wolting is pretending to be a former member of the SAS or the Parachute Regiment. Apparently this drives the ladies wild, and very few people claim to have been a former member of the Army Catering Corps or the Royal Army Pay Corps. However, in reality, such fake heroes are normally easily spotted, being spud-faced losers who look as though the only thing they have ever stormed is the eat-all-you-can buffet. The Americans are perhaps a little more advanced in dealing with such fantasists, having made stolen valor a criminal offense. Sadly, in Britain no such laws exist, and politicians have even now taken to a form of military wolting in order to appear more resolute and in touch with the armed forces that they normally regularly underfund and cut. Here are some recent examples of British politicians wolting it up for the cameras. Another politician with a penchant for the dressing-up box was renowned British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who, I've discovered, may have in fact committed the cardinal sin of stolen valour. To call Churchill a wolt would be completely wrong, of course. He had been a brave professional soldier in several colonial campaigns and in World War I. Not least riding the cavalry charge at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, where he personally slaughtered several dervishes with his Mauser C96 broom handle, and of course in South Africa, where as a war correspondent he dramatically escaped from Boer captivity. But Churchill did have a touch of the Hermann Göring in his penchant for medals and uniforms, but up to when he resigned his Territorial Army Commission in 1924, the rank of Major, Churchill had earned all of his many medals for British colonial campaigns and for service in World War I. But from 1939 onwards, Churchill managed to get back into uniform without holding a commission in the army, being an honorary colonel in a deluge of regiments and units. An honorary colonel is what it says on the tin, honorary. Beyond a nice uniform and attendance at various functions and parades, the honorary colonel is just a figurehead. In recent years, it has become the fashion that instead of appointing gruff old retired generals, honorary colonels, it is better to appoint TV personalities to these positions, whether in the Army, the Royal Marines, the Royal Navy or the Royal Air Force. This is done to encourage recruitment. So we have, for example, soon-to-be unemployed government minister, the Honourable Captain Penny Mordaunt, the Royal Naval Reserve, Honourable Colonel Bear Grylls of the Royal Marines Reserve, and Olympic athlete Honourable Colonel Dame Kelly Holmes in the Army. These people are not repaid for such services, though they do get a uniform allowance from the government, but they receive no campaign medals when the units they represent serve on active duties, obviously because as honorary officers they don't have the training, the experience to go with them. The exception appears to have been Winston Churchill. Churchill was, of course, very famous before he became Prime Minister in 1940. A former First Lord of the Admiralty in World War I, a journalist, an author, and a significant backbench Conservative MP in the House of Commons. In 1939, he was appointed Honorary Air Commodore of No. 615 Auxiliary Air Force Squadron, and he applied for a uniform allowance. One item missing from his RAF uniform was a pair of pilot's wings. Churchill had, in fact, trained as a pilot during World War I, but he had never soloed. The reason? He was an extremely bad pilot. His training reports note that he was too impatient and was uncertain about takeoffs and landings. If he had soloed, his instructors feared that they might have been responsible for killing the First Lord of the Admiralty, so he never did and therefore never qualified as a pilot. However, from March 1943 onwards, Churchill began to wear pilot's wings on his Honorary Air Commodore's uniform. How did this happen? Apparently, King George VI told the Air Council to award Churchill wings, due to his having clocked up 30,000 air miles flying around the world on war business. It seems a bit extraordinary that Churchill accepted pilot's wings for simply having been an air passenger, although occasionally, of course, he did take control of the aircraft under supervision of the pilot. In fact, he spent most of his time flying around the world sitting in a comfortable chair, drinking whiskey and smoking cigars. He wore the same wings that young men were wearing who were flying fighters and bombers all over the world, many of them dying in action. I think this smacks a bit of stolen valor by today's standards, but the RAF wings were perhaps only the tip of a waltzing iceberg that lurked beneath the surface of Winston Churchill's life in World War II. He went on to accept a host of honorary officer positions in the armed forces whilst Prime Minister, which is completely right and proper, but it gave him the right to wear military uniforms whilst concurrently being Prime Minister, something not seen in Britain before or since. Perhaps he wanted to appear more warlike as a leader, or perhaps even as a warlord, but if he did, he certainly had plenty of outfits to choose from. In 1939, Churchill was appointed Honorary Colonel of the Queen's Own Oxfordshire Hussars and in the Royal Artillery. In 1940, Honorary Colonel of the 6th Battalion Royal Scots Fusiliers, and in 1941, Colonel of the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, his old regiment. Also the 4th 5th Cinque Ports Battalion, the Royal Sussex Regiment, and the 489th Cinque Ports Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment, Royal Artillery. This gave him a wide selection of different uniforms to wear in different occasions, and Churchill often wore his uniforms in his capacity as Prime Minister, particularly on visits abroad to the troops or at important wartime conferences with foreign leaders. But post-war, Churchill's already impressive array of medal ribbons suddenly got a bit more colourful, with the award of not only 1 but 6 World War II British campaign medals. These were the 1939-45 Star, Africa Star, Italy Star, France and Germany Star, Defence Medal, and War Medal. Regarding the campaign stars, Churchill did not receive all of the stars of World War II. For example, he didn't wear the Pacific or Burma stars, or the Atlantic or Aircrew Europe stars. But it seems someone awarded him the stars based on his visits to military theatres of war. The question is, how did he wangle such awards as a civilian politician, remembering that though he may have worn military uniform, these were honorary ranks and he was a civilian with no war role in those theatres. He wasn't employed as a war correspondent or as a member of a civilian organization doing war work, and he had ceased being an army officer in 1924 when he had resigned his Territorial Army commission. So let's examine how he was awarded so many World War II medals. The 1939-45 Star was awarded to Armed Forces personnel broadly for 180 days' service between the 3rd of September 1939 and the 2nd of September 1945. As a civilian, Churchill did not qualify, and I should remind everybody watching this that honorary colonels are civilians and they do not receive campaign medals, then or now. Moving on, we have the award of the Africa Star. This was awarded to all British and Commonwealth personnel who served at least 1 day's service in an operational area of North Africa between the 10th of June 1940 and the 12th of May 1943, including not only the North African deserts but also Malta, Gibraltar, Ethiopia and Kenya. Churchill visited North Africa in his capacity as Prime Minister on several occasions in 1942 and 43, for example the 4th to the 9th of August and the 17th to the 23rd of August 1942 in the North African deserts, and was also in Cairo in Egypt the 8th to 10th of August 1942. If he was a soldier, then he would have more than qualified for the Africa Star, but he didn't meet the actual criteria. It would be the equivalent of Prime Minister Tony Blair visiting Iraq several times during the recent war there and then being awarded the Iraq War Medal, which was awarded to British troops conducting full tours of duty in the country. You can imagine the outcry in the media if that had happened, but it is the equivalent to Churchill's award of the Africa Star. His award of the Italy Star is very similar. Churchill visited British troops in Italy in August 1944. The 25th of August, he inspected men of the 4th Queen's Own Hussars, of which he was honorary colonel, as well as the usual visits to generals and meetings at headquarters and so on. There's no denying these visits were popular with the troops. They did raise morale. The qualification period for award of the Italy Star was between the 11th of June 1943 and the 8th of May 1945, having 1 day of operational service in the army in theatre. And of course I emphasize the word operational. Churchill was not operational. He didn't qualify. And to the France and Germany Star. Churchill visited British forces in northwest Europe on several occasions following D-Day. He spent 1 day in Normandy on the 12th of June and a few days in late July 1944. He was in Paris in November 44 and at the Siegfried Line in March 1945. He attempted to cross the River Rhine on the 25th of March, but was deterred by German artillery fire crossing the next day. Churchill was undoubtedly a brave and some would say reckless man, and I encourage you to watch my video about how the Prime Minister came under German artillery fire in March 45. But according again to the France and Germany Star eligibility criteria, he shouldn't have received the medal. It was awarded for operational service in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, the Netherlands and Germany between the 6th of June 1944 and the 8th of May 1945. And it was most definitely not awarded to civilians for sightseeing trips and meetings. Surely the handing out of such awards was inappropriate in this case, and an insult to the men, like my own grandfathers, who earned their campaign stars the hard way as soldiers, not tourists. Surely such awards are examples of stolen valour. However, when it comes to Winston Churchill, the rule that applies to everyone else seems to go out of the window, such as the overarching image of Churchill as war leader, some might say warlord. I'm sure many of the comments in this video will be along the lines of he deserved anything he could get, the country should have given them solid gold versions of these awards, blah blah blah, etc. But I don't think that's quite right. Contrary to popular myth, Churchill was a politician, he was not a general, and although he took an active part in the role, and some would say an interfering part in many of the campaigns, and also committed many mistakes, not the least of which the Greek and Crete campaigns, and also the refusal to supply adequate equipment to the British and Commonwealth troops fighting, of course, the Japanese in Malaya and Singapore. We should also note that he was thrown out of office at the end of the war in a general election, just as he was attending the Potsdam Conference, dumped by the majority of British voters who preferred a change. That change was Clement Attlee, Prime Minister for the final phase of the war with Japan, and he didn't receive any campaign stars or medals for his service. Churchill had, of course, according to the regulations, even less right to the Defence Medal and the War Medal. The Defence Medal, a very common World War II service award, was given for 1,080 days or 3 years' service in the United Kingdom, or 360 days in a non-operational area outside the individual's country of residence, or 180 days in an operational area overseas. You had to be in the military or in one of the civil defence services or the Home Guard to qualify. The list of civil organisation is too long to list out here, but I can say with immense authority that the office of Prime Minister was not one of them. However, those who qualified for at least one campaign star received the Defence Medal automatically, as long as they were military personnel. Again, someone fudged Churchill's request for these awards. The War Medal 1939-45 is also incredibly common, millions being awarded to British and Commonwealth service personnel. Qualification period for this medal was 28 days of military service between the 3rd of September 1939 and the 2nd of September 1945 in any theatre of war. How did Prime Minister Churchill meet that criteria? So the question is, if Churchill didn't actually meet the criteria for the 6 World War II stars and medals he received, who awarded them to him? Well, it seems that probably they were given to him by the King, or at least on the recommendation of the King, who also incidentally awarded himself the same series of medals just after the war, matching his own visits to troops during World War II. Some historians attempt to defend this by claiming that, as king, he was commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and this is technically, and I emphasize the word technically, true. The monarch is the titular head, the ceremonial head of the armed forces, and has no actual effective control over the day-to-day running of the military. The king at the time, George VI, also held the ranks of Field Marshal in the army, Admiral of the Fleet in the navy, and Marshal of the Royal Air Force. But of course he didn't actually command anything or anybody during World War II, as George VI's active military career had ended just after World War I. It is interesting to note that George only awarded himself campaign stars that matched his visits abroad on tours of inspection, exactly the same as Winston Churchill's awards. Is this because, in the case of the monarch, his military ranks are real, and perhaps because as titular head of the armed forces, he deserves to be awarded these medals? At least, are his ranks more real than those of Churchill's, with his honorary colonelcies? It's an interesting point, and one which seems very difficult to unravel both legally and constitutionally. After all, the next monarch, Queen Elizabeth II, didn't award herself any of the campaign medals of wars that took place during her long reign, notably Korea, the Falklands, 2 wars in Iraq, and Afghanistan. It poses an interesting question. If Queen Elizabeth II had paid a visit to Korea in the last year of the Korean War, during the first year of her reign as queen, should she have received the Korean War Medal? George VI's behaviour was odd in that it is not normal practice for monarchs to wear medals with their own images on them, as George did with both the Defence and War medals. The Queen didn't wear her own coronation medal, and neither does King Charles III. The eagle-eyed among you may notice that the Queen, in this photograph from the 1980s, is wearing both the Defence and War medals. This is because she served as an officer in the Auxiliary Territorial Service during World War II and fully qualified for them under the regulations. It seems that George VI was involved somehow in ensuring that Churchill received exactly the same medals and awards, and Churchill happily accepted them. Rather like King George VI's intervention in 1943 to give Churchill RAF pilots wings. The awards of the medals did not conform to the clearly written rules. According to royal biographers, King George VI was obsessed by medals, and went so far as to pressure the Americans to give him one of their World War II campaign medals as well. In her biography of the king, historian Sarah Bradford noted an extraordinary exchange over this US medal. Quote, "He adored medals and was an avid collector of them. In February 1944, he actually went so far as to have Eisenhower informed that he would be, quote, pleased to wear the American service ribbon for the North Africa campaign, end quote, so that the request could be passed on to General Marshall. When, almost 2 years later, he had still not received the actual medal, he caused Lascelles, and this refers to Tommy Lascelles, the King's private secretary, to write again to Eisenhower, quote, His Majesty, who always wears the ribbon, has asked me to let you know that he hopes you will not forget to send him the actual medal when it is struck, end quote. The design was not ready until July 1947, when Eisenhower duly forwarded the King one of the first medals struck, end quote. One point is that I think that Churchill had no reason to accept such awards. He had already received many awards from his own country and from the former Allied nations just after the war, these all being honours and awards not subject to military service criteria. Britain, for example, awarded him the Order of Merit in 1946, one of the highest awards available in this country. Belgium, the Grand Cordon of the Order of Leopold with Palm, also becoming Knight Grand Cross to the Order of the Netherlands Lion, Grand Cross to the Order of the Oak Crown of Luxembourg, and also the following military decorations: the Belgian Croix de Guerre with bronze palm, the Luxembourg Military Medal, the French Military Medal, and the Croix de Guerre with bronze palm. With all that illustrious ironware, you would have thought that hankering after a few extremely common World War II service awards would have been unnecessary, but apparently in the case of Winston Churchill, not. Perhaps this all tells us something about the personality of Churchill, and of course, since the war's ended, we've begun to learn a lot more about his personality, and also his mental struggles and problems with depression. My last point is, did President Franklin D. Roosevelt and President Harry S. Truman also award themselves the US campaign medals of World War II in their position as civilian presidents? Do let me know in the comments section below. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.